Hello, so as you know, today we are not having our class in person, and so instead I'm going to be recording this lecture. I'm going to be gone today, but if you have any questions where you want to come and talk to me, you can always come in during my office hours the rest of this week, or you can talk to me. Right now I'm recording this the week before our class is canceled, so you can come and talk to me before that as well, or you can send me an email if you've got any questions. There shouldn't be any announcements. I'm recording this the day right after we had our last class, so I really don't have anything new to talk about, but if something comes up, I can always send out a future announcement to let you know about it. Really, the biggest thing right now is just keeping an eye on what classes you want to enroll in, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me about that. So you'll notice here that I have a lot of content under week 9, and we're not really going to be looking at absolutely everything. I just wanted to give you a lot of resources, and I tried to break it down into resources that are a little bit more optional and kind of giving you an idea of which ones would be most helpful or not. So try not to be overwhelmed by how many different things there are under week 9. In this video, I'm going to go over, what to expect with all of these. So we've been talking a little bit about how we are moving towards creating wireframes, and then I'm going to have you turn that into a prototype where you're going to develop that into something that's a little bit more interactive. When you're picking your wireframe pages, I want you to pick pages that are going to tie into the user stories that you came up with and the journey map. And so you'll want to think probably, everybody's going to want to see the homepage, and then also it's up to you to think, are they going to want to go to a donation page? Are they going to want to go to some sort of page that has a form on it? Try to highlight pages in particular that really fit for the journey map, and then if the pages also work with some other user stories, that would be helpful as well, so that way you can kind of show just how much you can really do on those pages. So we're going to talk about wireframes, and wireframes are really the blueprint of a website. It's really not thinking so much about the styles of everything. You can think about basic styles and kind of how you would arrange things, but you should really be thinking about it more like you would with code, where you're really thinking about the different pieces, the different elements. I'm going to just show you a couple of different pictures. We're going to kind of just cycle through these, but there's some things that you're going to notice with wireframes. One thing, for example, is that things that are pictures tend to have a rectangle with X through it, and that's helping indicate that this would be some sort of media. You'll also notice this, let's see if I can find an example. Here's one where this is trying to show that there would be a video. So there's a little play button on it. There might be some other UI pieces that would get included, but you'll notice this a lot for pictures. Here we can kind of see there's a gallery. They're kind of using slightly different imagery to help indicate that these would be pictures. Here they're shading these in so we can tell that these would be pictures. Here we have some simple imagery in these as well. So it's not always going to look exactly the same, but you will notice there's a lot of similarities here. This is a good example where there's a placeholder image, kind of like how you would have lorem ipsum for text. You can have these placeholders for images, and that's something that you're going to see a lot. And then let me see if I can find an example. So you'll notice that you can have lorem ipsum for your text to help indicate where you might have text, but you might also see indicators of text with lines that are just going across. This kind of, like here we have one example, and that's actually a really great way to do it, where you have one of them shows what would actually be here. So we have, this is the video title, and then we've got the name, how many views, how long ago it was published, and then all of the other ones are just kind of these bars or these lines going across to help indicate, there would be more of the same here. Here we don't really need to know what the subscriptions are. We just want to know, okay, there would be some sort of, maybe there's an image here for each of the channels. This looks like, yeah, it's YouTube. So we've got the picture of the different channels, and then we've got the names, and so we have an idea. Now things like buttons, these we want to have text on them because it's going to help us understand what you could actually click on and what you could interact with. So this is helpful. We can tell that they're buttons because they have the rounded corners. It's helping us differentiate these between other things. Here we have a logo with an X in it. We've got add with an X. We've got the search. I'm just going to cycle through a few of these and see if there's any other things that kind of really stand out. Sometimes you'll notice something like this where you have some sort of call to action button over top of an image. So you might have some layering here. Here we've got some social media. This is interesting. In the technical interface skills class, I have students do something kind of similar where they have to create a web app where they will, a lot of times on web apps, you have the navigation at the bottom and you actually will add different icons instead. It's not something that you necessarily see on mobile websites though. So you don't really need to take notice of that for this assignment, but it's something good to look at in the future. And here they're letting us know what is a button because it has this drop shadow. So rather than having the rounded corners, you might see something like that. And with a wireframe, there's a ton of different ways you can make it. You could draw it out, you could do it in the app. Here you can see that they're using these squiggly lines to help indicate where there would be different headings and text. Now this can work fine for a quick sketch, but as far as a communication tool, this isn't really helpful because we don't really know what this is and how it would be used. So when you're turning in your assignments, I want you to make sure that you're actually adding in meaningful text. So that way, if we were to do testing and have a critique, people would actually be able to give you some feedback. This one's kind of a good example of a carousel. So here we have these pictures where we could tell that this is showing the first picture. If you were to cycle through these, it would show the other pictures in that loop. Here we have these indicators. If we click on this, it'll take us to more information. For the most part, it ends up being pretty simple. Once you start having more complex interactions, that's where you start having more details. But we'll take a look at some other resources. Now I've got this wireframing PDF. I'm going to go ahead and open this before we get into the PowerPoint. Now this is looking at creating a wireframe, and what I like about it is it has a lot more detail than I've really been able to find in other places. A lot of this is kind of more straightforward. You start with a sketch and then you move to a wireframe and then you create something that's more faithful graphically, like your mock-up, and then you eventually would code it. Here's some examples of what some sketches might look like. Now, this I think is a little bit more faithful, a high fidelity of a design than what you really need to have for a wireframe. We don't necessarily need to know what this header picture would look like, but it does give us an idea of how everything would generally be arranged. We've got some notes to go along with it. Here they're indicating that text would wrap around the images, so we can get an idea of how that would work. We've got the sidebar of more information. And then here they're actually blocking it up into how it would actually function as a wireframe. So I would consider this to be more of this kind of inspirational sketch. And then here is kind of more of the planning process. This is more of a higher fidelity design, but you'll notice that we're starting to think about the actual code and how we would layer this. So we've got our first nav choice, second nav choice, third nav choice. Here we have our H1. We've got our H2, we're starting to think about, okay, this is going to be an H3, and so with these other two ones. And it's helping us organize things and think about the logic of it. Now this is giving directions for how you could create a wireframe in Photoshop or Illustrator. There are different tools now that a lot of people like to use rather than using Photoshop and Illustrator, but what I like about it is it talks a lot about how to create these different shapes. And then it talks a little bit about what these shapes mean. So here we have an image placeholder, which we already looked at in a lot of examples, but it shows how you could create one of these, turn it into a shape that you could use over and over again, and then you could go back and you could revisit your shapes and be able to use them again in the future. So it's how you can kind of build your own little UI elements. So I think this is really helpful just because it shows the process that certain individuals take. Here's talking about Illustrator. We can kind of skip the actual steps of it, but it's the same thing. It's being able to create your own custom shapes and then be able to use them. And then this is the part that I actually like, is here we have some other different symbols. So we've got the image again. Now, rather than having the play button, this one is just showing that you can have a video with just a black box. I've seen that before too. You might have variations of this with audio. You might have more of like a skinny playhead that you could click on that would indicate that it would be an audio player. Maybe you have an icon that looks like a microphone or headphones or something. But this is how you would indicate that you have different media that you can click on. Here we've got the logo. Usually something like the navigation, you're really just going to have the text, but make it very clear. Have things spaced out well so that way you can tell that they're separate from each other. If you wanted to go ahead and put some sort of shape around it, like a rounded box, you could do that to help indicate that they're buttons. Here we have the picture again. There's the little arrows to indicate that you could click through these. If you have a call to action, you'd want to put it on a box with rounded corners. Here we've got pictures. But what I like about this is there's these little notations kind of helping describe them a little more. With things like links, it's kind of up to you. You might have it in blue text, you might have it underlined, some sort of indication that helps it stand out so that way you can tell it's separate from the other text. All right, so now that you know a little bit more about what wireframes are, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the PowerPoint and start looking at user experience in general. All right, and you'll notice this goes pretty quick, so it shouldn't take too long to get through. But here are 8 user experience questions to ask to help you think about different aspects while you're designing. So different usage questions to consider. Where are the users getting confused? This is the #1 user experience question that UX designers should ask. So you want to think about where are people having difficulties, and that's why I wanted you to start off with a journey map before we got into designing, so that way you could really think from that person's perspective. The best way to start combating user confusion is to perform user testing. And we're going to get into user testing in a few weeks, and we'll come back to this, but you can do user testing at multiple times throughout the project process. It doesn't have to be just after you've already created your design. You can test out what the design looks like before you start to help you figure out what the issues are. So things to look at: use industry standards. Users tend to apply rules they've experienced outside of your website or product. It may be worth sticking to certain trends in order to capitalize on a shorter learning curve. And that's why when you were doing your SWOT analysis, I wanted you to look at the mental models and think about how your site already fits in with the general conventions. Simplify copy. Reading is an art, and not all readers are artists. Your content should be accessible to a spectrum of educational and cultural backgrounds. I might have talked about this example before, but you want to be careful about using technical jargon. So if there's something that is specific to the content that you're looking at, but it's not something that is like in layman's terms where people might get confused, you want to think about how to choose your copy. And I actually have a resource on Canvas. So this is called the Hemingway Editor. And I know there's some other tools nowadays that maybe you're more likely to use, but this will take a look at your writing and it'll give you some suggestions, and you can also check to see what the reading level looks like. So if you are targeting a really broad audience, you would want to make sure that that readability fits with that group. So Like an average reading level would be grade 8. It's a really good starting point, so that way you can make sure that you can reach a very diverse audience. If you feel like your audience would need to have higher reading skills, you can go in and you can change some of these filters. Here we also have, and this was just the default that's on here, but they're giving you an example where we can look at, right here it's saying 1 of 13 sentences is very hard to read. So we could look at ways to go in and change that. Here we have 1 of 13 sentences is hard to read. So we've got very hard, hard to read. If you wanted to pay for this, you could go and look up more suggestions for grammar and spelling. But this is just a nice tool to analyze what your writing looks like, because I know not all of us are writers, and it can be hard to really know what would be appropriate for other people who might be reading content in a different way than what you would. All right, so rethink structure. Does the hierarchy of your site or product lack logic? This could be the culprit of user confusion as well. Consider reworking your page structure. So that's something that I want you to think of when you are creating your wireframes, is start really taking inventory of what is on the page. Does it make sense to be on that page? Should it be combined? I know a lot of the sites that students tend to look at have a lot of redundancy, and so you might think about, is it really just kind of adding a ton of fluff by having all the redundancy? Is it helping by making it easier to find, or is it just kind of burying the information so it's hard to find again? Add cross-reference links. If the categories are causing confusion, make navigation easier. So second one, is it easy for my users to complete a purchase or complete whatever call to action that you're needing? So you were supposed to come up with key performance indicators. So when looking at this, you would want to think, can people actually complete those actions of what you're wanting them to do? Or is there something impeding that process? So here I just have a few things, whether you're designing a site for online shopping or hoping to convert browsers to a paid subscription, the ultimate goal is to get users to buy from your platform. Asking this e-commerce user experience question forces you to examine and define any barriers. When in doubt, ensure there is always a call to action. And that's something else that you should think about is, for each page, is there a call to action? When you were doing your SWOT analysis, you should have already taken inventory. So that's where I would really just recommend go back to those notes and just refamiliarize yourself with all of the research that you've already done. All right, third step, should I add on-screen guidance? So this is something that is going to be harder to actually show in your design, so it's okay for you to not actually include this. But I would recommend just taking notes and thinking to yourself, what is appropriate for your site? You can always write about things that you would like to implement when you are turning in your projects and you're having to write these little reflection pieces. You could always say, I ideally would like to do this. I wasn't able to do it in my design, but this is what I'm cognizant of, what I'd like to do and what I think would be appropriate. So here we have implementing on-screen guidance is a great way to ease user confusion. Does it make sense for there to be some sort of pop-up? If there is a form that someone has to fill out, does it give them any errors if they don't fill out some of the form fields? Is there required information? One of my pet peeves, and I'm sure you all can agree, is when you're filling out a form and there's one piece that is missing that's required, but it doesn't tell you where in the form that you made the problem, and it doesn't tell you what you need to do to fix it. Maybe it's you need to have a password that has a certain type of character or something, but you are having a hard time finding that information. So just try to think about where you might want to have feedback, what would be appropriate or not. And some things that you could think about to determine that. Does your product or site require users to perform tasks that involve multiple steps? Do you have a large population of diverse users? Are you looking to reduce other types of support? All right, so these next ones are going to look at layout. Normally what I like to do at this part is just kind of create a dialogue. So we don't really have an opportunity to do a discussion for this. So you're going to have to do this on your own. But I want you to think a little bit about color theory. This is something that I go into in more detail in the later classes, like technical interface skills. But here I have some examples of different associations that we have with certain colors. So like red, we tend to think of ambition, energy, confidence. Purple, fantasy, creativity. So all of these, we have these different colors, and they do change depending on, like here we have according to culture, gender, age. There's different associations depending on like different groups of people. So you might want to think about that. But what I like for an activity is if you were to look at your phone, just because I know that people tend to have a smartphone on hand close by, is if you look at your apps on your phone, what kind of colors are they using for different types of apps? I know everybody's phone is going to have slightly different ones. It also depends on what kind of smartphone you have. For example, I have an iPhone, and one of the things that I've really noticed is that a lot of communication apps tend to have the colors of white and blue. And you might notice some of that too. Like the email app is white and blue. Discord, at least for me, is white and blue. LinkedIn is white and blue. Signal is white and blue. Skype is white and blue. Zoom is white and blue. GroupMe is white and blue. And you might have some other ones. Those are just the ones I can kind of see very quickly. And then you might look to see, like we've got red as an option. YouTube has red. Netflix has red. A lot of kind of entertainment things have red. The music app, at least on iPhone, has red. And you'll notice that there's a lot of similarities. What I think is interesting too, and I think this goes over a little bit better when we can have an actual conversation, is interesting to see where some of these brands will tie themselves to what the norm is, and then sometimes they try to break out of that so that way they can stand out in some way using a color that still is sort of adjacent. So for example, like YouTube is red, and that's really getting across this idea of energy, ambition, confidence, bold, passionate. And then you have something like Twitch, which I believe is purple, which is fantasy, creativity, distinguished. But they are both colors that you do sort of associate with entertainment and having something be a little bit more exciting, but also sort of regal. And there maybe would be colors that don't make as much sense. One that I find interesting, I don't have it, so I don't know if they've changed their design or not. Snapchat, I think, is really interesting because we have all of these messaging colors. Like Twitter also was white and blue, Facebook, white and blue, all of this white and blue, and then Snapchat pops up with yellow as a color. Very different, very kind of like a playful, energetic type feeling to it. So sometimes it's nice to go along with colors that you expect, but then you always have those indications of, okay, let's change things up a little and see if we can actually make our branding stand out. I know there's also like Instagram is another example of one that really changed their colors. Their designs changed a lot over time, but having more of kind of a gradient type look to it, involving a lot of colors. There's been some other apps that have also had a lot of color to it. But I would really recommend that you think about the color branding and if it makes sense with the website that you're looking at. Is there something that seems like off-putting? I think I've already told the example of how there's been a couple of students whose websites they've looked at. The color just seemed a little bit intense, maybe aggressive, considering the content matter. So you just want to think about what colors would you recommend. You don't have to go in and change any of the the branding that already exists. I'm not going to make you do anything like that. All right, so the best way that I have to preview this on my work computers in Paint. So a little bit of a different view. So this was an interesting project. I had a student who was looking at this website that was selling spices, and what they would do is they would, the company would send different magazines and flyers and stuff out to people in the mail. And so that was an actual important part of their marketing, was taking into consideration that they had this product, and then that they were also sending stuff in the mail in addition to sending emails and having social media. And they had this really interesting thing going on with their branding. So they have, well, two logos. They've got this logo that has the heart, the yellow text, and the kind of purple around it. But then they also like to bring in a lot of this orange. Here's another logo that they have where they're trying to tie in those three colors. So this would be like their main three colors. But they do occasionally bring in orange. And then in a lot of their pictures, they try to have these different series. So like here, there's a series. I don't know if this was like a line of products that were coming out during the summer. And then here they had some other ones. These are tying into artwork from famous paintings. And so they also have their own branding. And then they have a lot of like these generic labels for different spices where it's something that could be kind of mass produced easily. So all of their labeling is very unique, and it doesn't necessarily all fit together. And so this was an interesting project because the student could recognize that they were having issues with the color palette. And what I tell all of my students is you do not need to change the logo. You can do like small things to change the color palette, but it's more about finding something that fits with what already exists. Like in this case with all of these pictures, like these pictures are from the original website. And so I told them, don't worry about it. What you can do is design with what already exists. And then in your written description, you can say, ideally, I would recommend that they really tone down the colors. Maybe with their logo, they could really just have more neutral colors. So that way when they do have these different types of series for their branding, they could have those blend in a little bit better with the logo. This logo is so unique and it's got such specific colors that it makes it a lot harder when they do want to change things up a little bit and have other imagery. So it would be better probably if they actually did have something that was a little bit more like these bottom three images, where something like that could probably tie in a little bit easier with these other strong visual graphics versus trying to put this heart logo on something like this. All right, so I'll show you some of those other examples in a little bit once we get through the rest of this. Consider what your menu should look like. There are many different options for designing a menu. A good menu will be accessible but not distracting, and most important, easy to navigate from any point. Different menu styles afford different benefits. This is showing some different ways that you could make your mobile menu look. So you probably have seen the hamburger menu. There's also some other variants of this, but they all help to indicate that if you click on it, it's going to expand your options so that way you can see more items. So one of the biggest benefits is just being able to save up screen space on like tablet or mobile views. And you've probably seen this also on some desktop websites. I personally, for desktop sites, I think it's better to actually have your primary navigation showing. I think it's just adding an additional step for people to have to click on something. Like for example, our school website uses the hamburger menu, and while it does make it look more modern and sleek, I do think that added additional time can be really frustrating. So you want to have that balance of aesthetics and actual functionality. Menu design is a critical aspect of the user design, and your design process should include user experience questions such as, who are my users and what kind of menus are they accustomed to? You know, everybody's had that first time where they encountered a hamburger menu. I can't remember when I very first saw it, but there's still people who are getting used to a lot of different new UI icons and learning about how they work, and so you want to take that into consideration. Another question, what do my users need to achieve by using the menu? How can I simplify this menu and still meet my users' needs? And I know a lot of you have already been thinking a lot about the navigation. So a user should understand at a glance the visual hierarchy of any given screen. And the biggest way that you can really do this is while you are designing content, you yourself should think through what is an H1, what is an H2, what is an H3. You might have gotten to a point with your HTML classes where a lot of times when you go to validate your code, if you have an H3 but you don't have an H2, I believe it'll give you a warning and say, you know, you should have this as a subcategory. So you shouldn't be choosing your H3s just because you like that it has a smaller text. You should be thinking of it kind of like a textbook, where it's like your textbook, your chapter would be your title, and then all of the different sections of your textbook, you have the different headings, you have the different subheadings. And so everything that's part of a group of content, that should all have a shared heading, and then it should be broken into further detailed information. It shouldn't just be kind of random content on a page. There should be groupings and related content, and they should fit within a structure. And that might not have been something that the creators of the content have really thought about. So that would be something that you would want to think about when you're going through the content. Do the users understand what is important? And this is where it's really helpful to make sure that people aren't getting overwhelmed. A user should understand at a glance the visual hierarchy. We just talked about that. What information is a high priority and what is a low priority? And there's different things that you can do visually to help signify that. You can have things that are a lower priority be smaller, have less contrast, have less styles to them, so that way they appear more plain. And then you can have things that have a higher priority. You can style them in ways that they stand out. And just down below, I've got some different things that you could do to help with that. Font size, contrast, color, negative space, shapes. This gets talked about a lot. There's some different ways that you can look at this. Graphic designers, they talk a lot about Gutenberg Z and how you will read through content. Usually people start in the top left and then they move over and then down and over again. Website pages are a little bit different than graphic design. You'll also hear people talk about an F pattern. It's the same thing where you're starting the left, going over to the right, and then you go down like the letter F. The reason why I like this better is because it kind of indicates a little bit more this idea of like jumping, versus a Z is really this idea of you go over and then you go to the next line, and then you go over and then you go to the next line. And while this works to show this Z pattern, I think it works a little bit better with print where people really are reading all of the content, versus an F pattern I think indicates a little bit better that people are skim reading. And then here we have ways that people can give feedback. So predominantly looking at forms. How should I display my contact forms? Should your contact forms be exposed or hidden? So that's something to think about too. Do you want to make it harder where you don't get a bunch of contacts from people who really aren't interested? Maybe you want to hide certain information. I know some people can get frustrated if they can't find a phone number, but a lot of people don't want to have their phone number on the internet just because they're worried about getting a lot of spam. And so a lot of times it's better to have a contact form. So that's something that you could evaluate too. Is it easy to contact the person? Is it too easy to contact the person? You know, do you want to have that information on the homepage in the footer, or do you want to bury it a little bit? What makes the most sense? So this is just saying, however, an overt form can lead to passivity and create distraction for those who do not wish to reach out. Ultimately, every product is different, and asking this user experience question will help define what is right from your users. So you really want to think about what level of difficulty is going to be appropriate. Some people aren't going to like having to fill out something, especially if it's a longer form. You want to think about how much information do you really need. And that also goes into privacy. If people are filling out forms, you should really have a privacy policy that's saying what's going to happen with that information. Hopefully this is going to be something that you talk about in your HTML class when you get to the point of talking about forms. I think forms you're probably not at that point yet if you are taking HTML right now. But something to think about when you are filling out forms is that you don't want people to have to do a lot of unnecessary movements. So if you were filling out a form and it was asking you which state you live in, you wouldn't want to have a bunch of radio buttons. If you haven't learned this yet, these are radio buttons where you can only click on one option at a time. So let's say that you had all 50 states listed. This would take a ton of space on the screen. It would involve you having to move your hand to accurately pick one of these options. It would take up a lot of screen space, and it would also just be a lot of work. So that's where a lot of times instead you would have like a drop down, some sort of drop down where you can, a lot of times you can type into this and then it'll also show some different selections. And that's going to just make it take up less space. And it's also going to provide some ways for you to make it a little bit quicker for people. Or maybe it's your form has some autofill where your browser's remembering information like your phone number or your address, and it's going to make it a little quicker. And you can help predict things too. Like let's say that you are asking, how would you like to be contacted? Rather than just having a text box where someone has to type it in, you can give the most common options that you think that somebody would want to be contacted, and then you could always have an other category where somebody could write in a different answer. But it's just trying to think about how can you make that as short as possible, and then how can you help predict that information so that way you make it a little bit less frustrating. And then this is another good point here, a multi-view stepper. So if you have ever purchased something online, you might have noticed that some sites will group different categories of information together. So you could have, here's all your information about your billing, here's all your information about your address and where it's going to get shipped to. And they might even be on different pages, so that way you don't feel overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to go and fill out all of this information. Instead, it helps break it down a little bit more, so you're thinking, oh, I just have a few more things that I need to do. At a certain point, if you had a ton of pages, though, people are going to start getting frustrated, and they're going to feel like that information should have been more upfront. I feel like these are pretty straightforward. Besides data integrity, some input forms are more comfortable for certain questions than others. Choose your input forms after carefully asking yourself what each form's purpose and intended answer type are. All right, so next I'm going to kind of walk you through all of the other links that I have. Now, these are going to help you with getting access to working with Axure and Figma. I'm going to actually swap this because Figma is the one that I would recommend that you use. You can use Axure, but Figma is one of the top tools used in the industry right now. So I think it's best if people get familiar with that. I will go over both so that way you can kind of see the pros and cons of how they work, and it'll be up to you which one that you want to use. So going to this next list of information here, 7 best wireframe tools. I always like to just have an article that is linking to some tools that are kind of commonly popular. These sort of things change all the time. Some of these I've been seeing on these lists for several years. Sketch is a very top tool right now, and it's one that I would like to explore, but you have to have a Mac in order to take a look at it. So none of our computer labs have Mac, and so Mac computers, I should say. And so it's not something that we can really explore, but it is one that I've heard a lot of graphic designers talk about using, and it's one that I've seen a lot of video content for where people are talking about different tutorials and how you can do things with Sketch. So Sketch is something that you might encounter working in the industry, but it's not something that we can really cover in these classes because we don't have computer labs with Mac computers in them. These other ones, Mockups, Xpin, Justinmind, like these are ones that I've been seeing for several years. So those are ones that you could kind of take a look at, see if you're interested in them. It's good to just know that they exist. But Figma is one that I feel like really has blown up in the last 5 years and just really become more popular. So it's the one where it's probably top 3 that I've really seen. And it's been staying up at the top for the last couple of years. Adobe XD was another one that was used a lot, but Adobe was going to purchase Figma, and then that ended up not going through. And so Adobe's not supporting Adobe XD currently, and so it's not getting updated. Otherwise, I would say the top ones would be Sketch, Adobe XD, and Figma. So here there's just some information. What makes a great wireframe tool? It gives you a little bit more information. I really like this. We've got, what is this best for? Pricing? Is there a free version of this? What does this all look like? You can see some examples of what the kind of interfaces look like. A lot of them have the same sort of ideas. They might just be implemented a little bit different. So I don't know that it is going to matter so much. If you do end up using Axure RP, I have this link here. This is going to be under the resources, getting started. This has a bunch of video tutorials. I will show you some basics, but if you feel like you want more information, and this is actually RP9, so there are a few changes with, I believe it's 10 is the current version. But this is the Axure software channel, and so you might be able to go and find some updated video content for the newer version. And then Figma, they have their own resources section where you can go and you can learn about different content as well. You might find some interesting things in here, like UI kits in particular could be helpful. So that's what those resources are. So these ones I think are going to be most helpful. Here are the links to actually looking at Axure and Figma. And then under homework, I just wanted to provide a little bit more information. So here are 35 excellent wireframe resources. So not just tools, but also resources. So here are wireframing articles, wireframe your site, a bunch of different articles and reading. So this is all optional. I know I have it. I have this under the homework section, but it's more, I want you to look at it and just consider for yourself, is this information meaningful? Is this something that you really want to read more into? Is this going to help you as you're coming up with your final project? If you find it overwhelming, that's fine. You can just close out of it. This I really like. There's a lot of really helpful information in this. So, Beginner's Guide to Wireframing. Some of this information I would consider inaccurate. So we have this page, which is showing kind of your typical wireframe, but we have at the top, we've got the header, and we've got the footer at the bottom, but then here they're calling this the body, which if you think about this from a code standpoint, this should really be called the main. And this is one of the issues with having information go back and forth between somebody with more of a graphic design background versus somebody with more of a programming background, is some of these terms get used interchangeably, but they are very different things when you're actually coding. So you might get something where a lot of times in graphic design they'll call it the body copy, and so what they're thinking is the text that is the main body of content. It's not the header, it's not something in the footer. But really, like with coding, everything that's visible is the body. So you just have to know to expect that there might be some differences in how things are created. So this is just kind of building out this navigation. This I think is interesting. I don't know if Tumblr is really used that much anymore, but here they are talking about get inspired by going to the Tumblr's I heart wireframes. This I think is interesting. Now, I'm always hesitant to tell people to go in and add content to their browser. So I won't say, you have to go and do this. This is up to you if you want to go ahead and add this to your browser or not. But what it does is it will take a page and then it's going to try to break that page down into a wireframe so you can kind of analyze it a little bit easier. It's not going to be like a perfect translation of what you're actually looking at, but I think it helps a lot with looking at the hierarchy of content and the general organization of content. So you could try this out with the site that you're looking at. This is talking about how your process can look a couple of different ways. You can go straight from sketching to coding. There could be some other steps in between those. Here, there's some tools. I think a lot of these tools are outdated, so you can look at this if you want, but I think you can mostly skip through most of these suggestions. I like this section on grids because I think it really helps demonstrate how by having everything align over the whole composition, it can just make everything feel more harmonious and unified. And it helps just give it a better hierarchy. So here we have like the logo is lining up with the banner and is lining up with this first feature. Over here, all of this side content is lining up. And it's just making it feel a lot more cohesive. Here they are adding in more of a hierarchy by having the things that are most important. They have the styles for it changing so they stand out a little bit. I think this is a really good example here where, for example, on your pages where you have a donate button, maybe you want to do something like this where you have most of your navigation has the kind of standard style, and then you could have the style for one of the buttons actually stand out a little bit from the other ones. Here they're using the grayscale to help give emphasis to what's going to be the most important. And we'll see this one again. This is a really good example of a wireframe. So it's more of a, you could maybe even call it a mock-up, where it's kind of more of a low fidelity mock-up. We don't have like the specific images. We do have the specific text. This is kind of the level I would like to see more with the wireframe, and I have some examples, but something where we can tell what everything is, but you're still fine-tuning how you would organize things. So I want to skip down a little bit. Let me see if I can zoom into this picture, but this I think is a really good way of showing how with your wireframe you're putting in the content, but how it's styled is going to make it totally different. So here we have like this testimonial. It has a completely different style here, and even some of these things had to rearrange a little bit in order to fit. And so it's not perfectly the same, but it still gives us an idea of how the content is going to be arranged. So that I think is a really good resource. Let me zoom back. Here we've got wireframing for beginners. If you're just looking for a little bit more information to read, this I like because these I think are good graphics, kind of showing a good basic wireframe design. So you have kind of an idea of what this would look like. All right, let's go ahead and look at the homework description. So I want your designs to basically look somewhere between these two. So I don't want it to be a sketch. You are going to need to have more precision than this. And that's where you're going to be making a digital design anyways. But it doesn't have to have the grayscale, like the grayscale information that we have over here. You don't have to worry about having what's most important, like a darker color. You definitely don't have to go to this point where you're going in and adding in your color palette and all of that. That's something that we're going to do with the next assignment. And the way this is going to work is you're going to develop your wireframe, and then using that exact same file, you are going to continue, and then you're going to turn it into a higher fidelity version where you will finally add in your images and your colors and all of that. And I'll give you some time to do that. So this will be your kind of rough draft version that you're going to go back and add to. All right, so the purpose of this assignment is for you to practice developing wireframe mockups for prototyping. In this assignment, you will look at creating wireframe mockups for the website you've been researching. These low fidelity mockups are used in the early stages of the design process to concentrate on the interaction design, navigation, and basic layout. They are intended to help you evaluate a preliminary design, not a finished version. You will be restricted to grayscale schematic designs with no high fidelity graphics or typography. So don't worry about the font, don't worry about the colors. So I want you to focus on 3 pages. Now, when you get to working on the next one, you might end up needing to add more pages. But I want you to think about like what would be your typical template pages. Probably your home page, maybe there's a page with a form in it, but try to think of pages that you could reuse and kind of adjust. You want to have a clear navigation and kind of a clear template to the pages where you can kind of carry over different design aspects from page to page. For the design, you should focus on your persona and the user story that you came up with to help influence your decisions. And then here I have your design can be done in phases. So this can help you with figuring out, kind of brainstorming how you want to approach it. You don't have to follow that scheme exactly, but it may help you break down the process. So if you want to skip this, that's fine. Here I would suggest that you use Adobe XD, Figma, or Axure. I should probably I'm going to go ahead and edit this real quick, and I'm just going to remove where it says Adobe XD. If you do have Adobe XD on your computer, I would like to say you're welcome to use it. I personally like Adobe XD probably the most. But all of your projects in the future, you're not going to be able to necessarily always access those. So I think it's best to not have anything in Adobe XD. All right, with the resulting wireframe mockup, you should be able to communicate the user experience of the site. Developers should be able to understand the basic site interaction by studying your mockup, especially if it is well annotated, so you can always add notes to it as well. I suggest that you use Figma or Axure RP to do this work. You can technically use another tool, but you will need to make sure that you can build off of it to create something that's interactive with the next assignment. So if the tool that you choose doesn't allow for prototyping and actually linking the pages together, you don't want to use it. So I would say a lot of these other websites, they're mostly for static designs. They're not for interactive designs. All right, so this is where some people get confused. Create 3 screen designs for both mobile and desktop. So you would have the same 3 pages that are the desktop version, 3 pages that are the mobile version. When you go forward with the next stage where you're going to do a prototype, where it's going to be a higher fidelity, you will choose one of those. You'll choose either mobile or either desktop. But for now, I want to see what your considerations are with the mobile and the desktop versions, and what are things that you have to be unique, and what happens to that content. The 3 screens should work together to illustrate at least part of your user stories. So don't just pick the 3 easiest pages. Pick the 3 pages that make the most sense to the content your users are interested in. You can also think about the things that you wrote about with your key performance indicators and what kind of content you really want people to engage with. And then in addition, I want you to write a short report documenting your design. This should be neat and clear, not overly designed, but suitable for a process portfolio artifact. Basically, I want you to give some information to help explain your process. So here we have description of the website's purpose and basic functionality. Be sure to include a sitemap that documents the interactive architecture so that way I can understand how these pages work together. If you have sketches, include those. If you don't, that's okay. Process description of the intermediate steps you performed. So, if you went through any of these in particular, write some information about that. And then analysis. This is what most of it's going to be. Summary of the results of your testing. What about the mock-up worked well? What needs improvement? Is there something that you would like to include but you can't because of the limitations of the software, or maybe it's just the limitations of what you know how to do in the software? Just so I can see that, I know all of you have bigger ideas than what you can really show at the moment, and that's fine. That's going to help communicate like what your intentions are. And then just include any other additional resources that you have. If you've got other sketches, other things that you're really testing out and you want to include it, you can do that. If you don't have anything else, that's fine. You don't have to worry about that. I would definitely recommend looking at the rubric. This is going to help you get a better idea of like what's required for this. Here we've got this. I would like to see more information. I can tell from this that this is a picture. This is a picture. Here we have who we are. It's basically a paragraph that's telling us a little bit more about this website. I do like the navigation. I think that's helpful. We even get this indication that we're on the home because it's a slightly darker color. And I would recommend going beyond the fold. You might have heard of the term like above the fold. So most of these designs are just showing what would be on the screen, but that can be really limiting. So you can go beyond that. Here we have the same page though, where since it's on the mobile version, they were able to show a little bit more. We see here like the sign up and login. They decided to have the navigation stack kind of similar to the homework in the HTML class, which is fine. If that's what your experience is for creating designs for mobile, use what you already know and what you've learned from your other classes. So here we've broken these down so we can tell that these are paragraphs. Little things I would probably give feedback like this doesn't line up with the top two. I'd like to see something like this where it's like all of these should really align with each other. Here we have an example of a form, so card information, and this is where the more specific you can be, the better, I think. So in this case, I would like to see what are the labels, like what is this first one? Is this first name? I mean, we already know card information is probably the number. And then date. I mean, this doesn't really look like what you would fill in for the date. So I would like to see maybe a label to help clarify it, maybe some sort of indication that looks a little closer to that UI. But otherwise, I feel like this is a good example of what this should really be looking like. Here they're trying to differentiate the donate from the menu just to make sure that there's not any way that would get slowed down. People will always be able to find that button. I think a choice like that would be fine. Here, rather than just saying text, I'd like to see a little bit more what that text would look like. Is it a list that's just describing what is part of this treatment? Is it a paragraph? So this, I think, helps give a pretty good idea. They're using these bars as a way to show the paragraphs of information. That's fine. Here we have lorem ipsum. Again, something like this, I would usually say you should probably just have it left aligned just because it would be hard to read. But we still get a pretty good idea. I like this, having which page is underlined or styled in a different way so you can tell in the navigation what you're looking at. This I would prefer if the nav at least had actual labels on it so we could tell, like, I can guess what this is, but I don't know for certain what this is. And this is something that I feel like could get to be a little bit frustrating. So having a little bit more indication as to what these interactive things are. I'm a little bit less worried about it with like the footer, for example. Here's an example where we can see what the desktop version looks like, and then there's a mobile version next to it, so we can see how it changes. This is a couple of different mobile pages. So this person was looking at a restaurant where you could look at the menu, and a couple of these other pages. This one is a little small, but I feel like it's pretty clear what the information is, just kind of how it's being organized. This, I think the biggest thing, I feel like some of this text is really small. There's a lot of space here, so you might think about things like that. I want to show you the prototype versions of some of these, and some of this is limited to what you can create yourself, what you can do in the software, what already exists. So I understand some of these are not going to look the same way that you would ideally like them to look. For example, they have the logo from the actual website, and I think this logo is too detailed for how small a mobile version of it is. You know, that's fine. I'm not going to tell anyone to go and create a new logo. That's something that I might give as feedback, but I know it's out of your control. But they decided that there was going to be a login capability, and so we have a picture here to help indicate that you would click on this and it would show you your profile. We also have a hamburger menu for the navigation, and then we're able to see kind of more of this information on these pages. Here's an example. This is a website where you could sign up for pottery classes, and so they use the logo up here. We've got a hamburger menu, and then they ended up showing on a calendar what were the dates for the different classes that you could sign up for to help give an indication of how to interact with that user experience. This one we actually saw the wireframe for, so now we actually are seeing how some of this content would be organized. We can see they're trying to bring in some of the colors from the logo into the design. Some of this, like this, I probably gave feedback about how these are pretty tiny for a mobile site, the sign up and the login button. And so something like this, I would probably rather have it be larger, where it would take up more space on the screen. If you were to imagine actually clicking on this with your fingers, it would be really difficult to click on one without clicking on the other one. So that's something to also think about in your designs. This, I think, is pretty good. Again, they're taking images from the actual website and trying to get it to fit in as makes sense. Something like this, you know, I would give feedback of you want to make sure that your text is actually fitting in your boxes, so resize it so that way it kind of makes sense. I understand that some things are going to be a little bit lower fidelity just because it's a little harder to create. Something like this that's saying apply is going to be probably more of a button, so it'd make more sense to have it rounded like more of a pill shape. Now, this person has background experience with Photoshop and Illustrator, and so I think that they felt a lot more comfortable going in and changing the design. So I understand that not everybody's design is going to look like this. So I just wanted to give you that going forward. You know, this isn't my expectation, but a lot of this is more about how things are being organized. Like, does it make sense? So they wanted to really highlight and organize things where there would be these two pictures balancing out the center. They kind of have a unique idea of having the logo here instead of having it in the top left. Here is the social media, but I think it really works with their design and how they wanted to move forward with it. So sometimes it's about going in a different direction than what you would originally be doing. There are still some things like I'm a little unsure of what's going on here, if this is an arrow or like a home button. It's a little confusing. So you just want to make sure whatever you do put in your design, it's got a clear intention. This one ended up being an interesting project because they wanted to design a sub piece of the Johnson County website. And so they're not really focusing on the top section. They're focusing more, and I know it's kind of hard to see my mouse pointer, but they're focusing more, I'll just draw on it, on this section here. And so they were more interested in what's going on with this side navigation and then the content underneath of this, because this top part is really a separate piece that they don't have as much control over. This one I think I had mentioned before about the photography store where they were looking at adding in a different audience. This I thought was a really interesting page because they were wanting to look at the filter options. And I think this is something where it's maybe still simple enough that it's a little bit confusing as to what you can do. Before the original website, it didn't really provide a lot to go off of because everything was in a sidebar where you would search through categories. So it didn't have a filter at all. So this is making huge strides by trying to go ahead and add in filtering. But I do feel like part of this is confusing with Canon and Nikon, where it's hard to know like what type of category is this. Are these search terms? Is this like an either or? Is this and options? Like or are you these are the two brands that you can pick from, so you are picking between the brands. It's a little bit confusing how you're actually navigating it. This I think is working good, this add more filters. But you can definitely use this as an opportunity to play with something new that you just haven't really had an opportunity to really think about much before. I think it's really great that this student went and decided to try out something as complex as a filter. This one we already looked at before. A lot of theirs was trying to find a way to tie in all of the colors together and kind of reorganize the content a little bit. This one is more of a web app. And so this is for a food truck. And so they wanted to be able to show information of where the food truck would be at. And then also breaking the pages down more into kind of the pages you would see in an app. One of the things I like about this example is the fact that there's a different color on the page that it is selected. So it's easier to tell which one you're actually on at the moment. I do think the color combination is a little too similar. It makes it a little harder to see because it doesn't stand out as much, but I think that's a really good idea. This one I like to show as an example of how you can use content that already exists and collage it together. So this is a bistro that already exists. They use some pictures that they found online, and then they actually used some of the search results to help show how they would like to have a map actually on the website. The map doesn't currently exist. Rather than having to create a map from scratch, they went and they just got Google map results or something like that in order to kind of show as a placeholder, like, this is the type of thing I would like to have. Maybe it's not a perfect one-to-one example, but it helps get across the idea. All right, so that should hopefully give you an idea of what to expect for the next two projects. I'm going to go ahead and show you some basics about Figma and Axure. So there's some educational versions of both of these. So if you go to figma.com/education, you can get verified, and this will give you, I believe, the premium version of Figma. The free version limits a little bit of what you can actually do, and it would be fine. I know that the free version of Figma will kind of limit how many files you can work with, but you should be able to fit everything that you need into the one. So even if you use the free version, that would be fine. You can continue with Google, and it can use your StuMail email. When you sign in this way, it's going to ask you some information. Are you a student? What type of institution? It'll ask you to fill in a little more information. And then here it's going to ask you, please upload a copy of your class schedule, proof of enrollment, etc. And so you would need to give them that information. From what I've heard, they're not super picky. You should be able to get through all of that without any problems. And then once you get into Figma, you'll have this dashboard, and you can see, like, I've got projects that people have shared with me. That's what a lot of this is stuff that has been recently viewed. I've also got shared files, shared projects. I can also organize them in different ways. Over here, you'll see I've got my information. I can choose light or dark mode. I could log out over here. I can create a new draft or a project. You can also work as a team. So if I wanted to create a new project, I can go and click on the plus next to the draft version. Up here you'll see we've got new design file. That's another way you can do that. New FigJam board, new slide deck. You can import projects. So you could have somebody export one and then you could import it in. So I can go ahead and just click on new design file. I don't know what would be easier for all of you if I had this in dark mode or light mode. I prefer dark mode. Hopefully it's not too difficult to see. So just a heads up, they recently updated this, so they've moved things around a little bit. I'm used to this being up towards the top instead of at the bottom, so it's a little bit different. Here we have our main Figma button where we can go and create a file, we can edit, we can go and change our preferences. So all of our kind of file management stuff is going to be more over here. We've got this option to kind of have things take up less space. I can change the name of this project. Just call this demo. And then here I can choose between the file. We've got some pages here, or just a page. We've got assets. This can be really handy where you can go and you can look up different iOS UI kit pieces. It's kind of up to you how much you want to try to play around with everything and kind of look for things that already exist. You may or may not find things that are going to be useful. Here we've got this little keyboard. So that could save you some time going through all of these assets. I'm going to switch back to file. And you'll notice on the right side we've got me as a user. Here we have this option to preview. We can't do anything with that just yet. I can also share. This is how you're going to actually turn in your project. So you're going to want anyone, or anyone with a link can view it. You don't want to have them edit it, but you can do this, and then you can share it and copy the link. Here we go, copy link, and then that's what you would submit to Canvas, is that URL. And then you could also save a version by going to export. I might have to wait until I actually have some files on here to really show you. So you'll notice that there's some information in the top right. There's design view, there's prototype view. This doesn't really make much sense until you have anything. So down here we've got our toolbar. We've got move tool. We can switch between this, scaling, a hand tool. The hand tool lets you just move things around the space. I'm going to start here. This is a weird looking button, but this is our frame tool. Because different software uses different names. You know, with Photoshop, it would probably be called a canvas, or you would have your artboard. Well, Adobe has those names already, and so Figma is trying to be different. So they're calling them frames, but they're basically like your artboard. So if you click on this, we can come over here and we can decide which size do we want to design for. So I could have iPhone 16, and so then this design is going to match the dimensions of iPhone 16. And you will also want to learn some keyboard commands. It kind of works as you learn how to do things. So you can click on this, move it around. I actually just clicked on Control. I'm on Windows right now, but Control and then using the scroll wheel on my mouse is letting me zoom in and zoom out. You can also do like Control plus and minus, but it jumps kind of further. So kind of fine-tuning this with a scroll wheel, if you have one, can be convenient. And it's actually pretty easy to get started. So I can click on this, do Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I can have my 3 pages. I can double click on this. I can call this the home page, double click, call this about, call this contact, and then I've got my 3 pages. And you'll notice over here we've got these 3 different layers. If you want to organize these as your pages instead, you could have page 1, page 2, that would be fine. Sometimes it's nice to see them all at the same time instead of having these separate from each other. It should work fine either way. If you do it like this, I would just recommend making sure that you name things as you work. So that way it doesn't get, oh, I have contact on both of these. Oh, that's fine. We'll switch this one to about, just so we have some variety. So you can have your pages, and then each one you could have different layers. If you want to have them all on the same one, that's okay too. Let me go back to this one and we can go do another frame. So we can now go to the desktop version. I'm just going to pick a regular desktop. And then what you could do is you could develop both of these at the same time next to each other. So that way you can compare them side by side. And I actually really like doing all of them on the same one. You could always move them later, and you can extend these so that way they go beyond the essentially like the above the fold and below the fold. You can have it go beyond, so that way you can show more of that space. And then when you go to preview, it will preview it as if it is a particular device, whichever device that you tell it, and that's going to make it so you can actually scroll on that page. So we don't have anything on this, so you can't really see it, but it's previewing it like it's on the actual phone, and you can choose some options about how you want to preview it and present it as well. We can look at that in a little bit. So now that we have this content, and you can use the space bar to switch between the selector and the hand tool to kind of help move around the space. This is really helpful. We've got these rulers up here. Now, if you've ever used something like Photoshop, you might be familiar with this idea of having these layers. I'm going to change this so we can tell the difference. But with these, this helps you tell whatever's on top is going to be in front of the other items. So here we've got move, hand, scale. Here we've got frames, section, slicing. You don't have to really worry about these. And then this is where you're going to build up most of your content. So if we wanted to have, let's just have a little logo at the top. maybe I want to do something like this. If you use something like shift, it's going to make it so it doesn't change the aspect ratio. And then I can do Control C. Maybe I want to do something like this. Here I want to draw a line. I'm going to use shift to keep it straight. I can copy it. And you'll notice that it's going to try to get your content to line up with each other, which is really handy. So, I mean, this looks kind of like a hamburger button. I was thinking maybe this was some text that was going along with this logo, but I'm actually gonna just have this be a hamburger menu as well. Something like this, I could click and drag to select it. Right click on this group, and then I could change this. Whoops, hamburger menu. Let's change this so it's actually called logo. This one, change it so it says logo. And you can just develop everything that you're going to need. So once you have these things selected, you can also change things about them on the right hand side. So here I've got rectangle, and then I've got some information about it. So I can actually use the shapes together to create new things. Like, let's say that you wanted to create some complex shapes. You could do union selection, subtract, intersect, exclude. There's also some interesting things you can do. Here we have select matching layers, create component, edit object. We can also zoom in over here. Here we've got position. This can help too. Like here we've got these buttons. I can use the alignments to make sure everything's lining up. If you want to make sure you have things at a particular position, it always starts with this top part is going to be 0, 0. So I could say that I want something to be, you know, this is kind of an awkward number, 291. Maybe it makes more sense to say 290 instead. We can also change the rotation of something. Doesn't really make sense for a hamburger menu. Here we can rotate it by 90 degrees. We can flip it horizontally or vertically. Here we have some options for constraints, and you'll find that there are some different options. Like here there's options with alignment where there's spacing between items, so you could check some of that out. There's some interesting layout options as well. Dimensions, so this would be the width and the height of this particular object. So if you wanted to go in and change it, you can click on the corners and change it there, but I can also type it in over here instead. Here I've got appearance, opacity, corner radius. So if I wanted to turn this into my navigation buttons, I could go and I could change the corner radius. That's a little harder to see because it's, let's do something a little more obvious. So I could change this, so then I could have a bunch of buttons, and this is how you're going to build up everything. Eventually you will be able to change the colors. There's also stroke, there's different effects like a drop shadow, options. And then as you're working through things, just make sure that you are naming things. So like once you have all of these figured out, you could group these, call them, whoops, call these your nav. And then same thing, like once you have all of this, I could copy this, and then I could come over to, I suppose this is the mobile version. So really I should copy this, but you could copy these over to the other pages to make sure that these are actually all the same. All right, other things, we've got images. We'll cover this more next time, but you can also add in images. Here we've got the pen tool, pencil tool, text. For text, you can click and you can keep typing. This is better for headings, but if you want to have a text box, you would want to click, hold, and then release, and then it's going to make sure that your text is going to wrap. So it's better for you to have an exact container. Here you can add in different comments. So you could say, I click on this and then add a comment saying, this is where the logo goes. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. And then you could share this with other people. And then you could end up having somebody give you feedback on it. Maybe you're asking like, hey, do you think this makes sense with the hamburger menu, or should we do something else? And then somebody could give you some feedback on it. We'll get into the prototyping. Let me switch. So here we have the dev mode as well. This you have to upgrade to the professional, but this is something that is interesting. I don't know that it works perfectly well, but it's something that a lot of people are trying to move towards, where you could essentially take your design and try to turn it into code. I've heard that there's, it's not perfect necessarily, but it's something that I think a lot of these design tools are trying to move more towards. But that's what this would be. And then here we've got different actions, assets, plugins, so kind of more of my recent history. It's kind of more of what that's showing. And then here we have prototype. We'll look at this more, but essentially what we could do is we could say, okay, if I click on this, then we could say, okay, what's going to happen? Interaction. On drag, on click, on whatever these are. So on click is usually what you're going to have. Then I'm going to navigate to, and then this is where I would need to decide, where am I going to navigate to? Maybe I'm going to navigate to a different page, and it looks like it wants to only access frames that are on the same page. So probably doing these in different pages is not going to be a good idea. Which is unfortunate, because I feel like this ends up making it kind of confusing. But we'll do it like, I'm just gonna, we'll do this real quick. So this is going to seem a little silly, but I'm just going to move where the circle is so that way we can tell a definite difference. And usually for a hamburger menu, what you would do is you would have an additional page that would essentially act as a stand-in for your hamburger menu, where you could remove this and then you could just have your list. It's really tiny, but I just had it say button 1. And if you're working with text, you have a bunch of other options that will show up. Like here, there's going to be typography, so you can choose the font and the sizes. I wouldn't worry about the font and the colors just yet, but you can go ahead and think about the size and what would make the most sense. Okay, so we could have first one, second one, And then once you have things designed how you would want them, I can go to prototype and I can say, okay, if you click on this, then that's where this interaction, we're going to say on tap, we're going to navigate to hamburger menu. And then I can say, okay, well, when I click on button 1, I know they're all called button 1, but we'll say on tap, I'm going to go to navigate to the mobile home, and you can choose the animation. So it's pretty quick and easy to actually design this. And then I could say if I go to button 2, and you can actually click and drag it. You don't have to use this over here. So let me just make this a little quicker. So on tap, navigate to contact, that's fine. And then button 3, it's going to go to this one. So now if I preview this, and I should be able to use my arrow keys to scroll through these. So if I get to a page that I don't want to be at, and it's not giving me what I want, I can always just flip through them. So here, if I click on the hamburger button, now I can go to 1, which I know not all of these got the interactive hamburger, so I'd want to make sure that I copy that over to the other ones too. But we can tell that they're different. All right, so hopefully this gives you a pretty good idea of working with Figma. I don't want this to drag on for too long. There's tons of tutorials you can use. And then here we've got this option again for sharing. So you can copy the link, and that's how you can submit things. So we're going to take a look at Axure. And let me actually show you this first. So we've got free subscriptions for students and teachers. This is if you go to axure.com/edu. You need to submit a request, kind of like the other one. The only downside I've seen to this is that a lot of times it will go into my junk folder. And so I think I'm waiting for approval when it's pretty much automatic. So if you sign up for this and you don't get it, you would want to make sure that you just check your junk folder. One of the reasons why I recommend this one is because it has a lot of UI elements already built in. And then also, it's a software that we already have on the computers in the computer lab. So it's something that's going to be guaranteed to be there. The nice thing about Figma is it's done in the browser. All right, so this is, if I open up Axure, it's going to ask me to sign in. I can't really show you what the screen behind this looks like because it wants me to handle this first, but it's saying I can open existing or I can create a new blank file. Here we have prototype starters, which you might want to go ahead and try just because it says it has some templates already. Here we've got UX prototyping, so there's some nice things that you can start off with. I'm going to just go ahead and do a blank file. So some things that I think are useful about this is a little bit less modern and stylish, I think, as Figma. But what I like about it is I think it handles things and looks a little bit more like Visual Studio Code or other text editors where you're already familiar with kind of a certain type of organization. And so I think that for people who are more on the web development side, this might actually be more appealing. But it has a lot of the same concepts. So, for example, here we've got a bunch of these little UI pieces. They're already here. I can just click and add these. I can resize them. We've already got our buttons. We don't have to be making these from scratch. Here we've got our headings. We don't have to worry about what size to make them. Even this is bringing in lorem ipsum for us. Maybe we could create some hamburger buttons with these. So I think this would be really good for getting started. You'll notice that there's a limitation though. Like with Figma, I could bring in that little keyboard UI, Here, I don't see one. So there are a lot of options. Like here we've got a bunch of form stuff. This is actually really great. Here I've got this little list box. I've got a little text field, a text area, radio buttons, lots of fun things here. But there are also some limitations. So Figma is really great. There's tons of stuff that people have added to it that you can take note of. You'll notice it's kind of interesting. We've got just this sort of infinite scrolling space vertically and horizontally. And that is a lot like how your actual page works, where you're creating these limitations of how wide your pages are and what happens with them. All right, so over here we've got our page. If I want to add on more pages, I add them here. You can technically add folders. I'm going to double click on this. Home. Whoops. Contact. About. And then a lot of these tools are the same. They just look a little different. They're in a different spot. Here we've got our toggle selection, or we can have select contained. Here we have different shapes where we can create our own. We can add in text. So I can click, or I can click and drag. Here we have options for our form items. Here we've got some specific things like repeaters, inline frames. We've got a pen tool that we can use. I'm going to just add in some little things here. Maybe this is our logo. Actually going to delete this. I'll use some of these. So we've got heading. Maybe we've got 2 headings here. Got a box of information. Can do control copy, and it also gives us alignment suggestions to make sure things are organized. You can select things like this, and then maybe we want to center what we have, so that way, or maybe when I'm working on this I want to use these alignments, so that way I make sure that they all align with each other, but you can use those to help you. So one thing I wanted to show you is with adaptive views. So if I had to double click in order for it to show me all these tabs. This is what I wanted to show you. This is more like Visual Studio Code, where you are probably familiar with being able to have multiple files all at once. So if I wanted to have this similar content, I could copy it and then paste it to these other pages. And then let me just start with the home page. Here I have these adaptive views. Now I think the newer version of Axure has this in a slightly different place, but I can click on the adaptive views and I can say, and usually you want to start with a mobile first approach. So we would start with, let's just do iPhone 13. So I can start with that, and then I can add another one. And then this is where I could go ahead and add in tablet. And this would be like your media queries. If you're taking HTML right now, I think you should be, I can't remember if you would be close to talking about media queries or not lately. But you would have these sets of styles. So basically, if you're working within like your iPhone styles, your mobile styles, these are the styles you want to have, and then you'd overwrite those with the next set and then overwrite it with the next set. So I can say okay, and then now it's actually going to change the width, so everything here is going off of it. And then here I have affect all views. So I could have, if I want something to be the same on all of the views, I could click on this, or I can kind of bounce back and forth for each of these. So I could say, okay, well, for this mobile version, I want to bring everything over like this. And then on the portrait version, these are going to actually stack next to each other. This is going to go in the center. And then this is where we could start adding in the buttons, for example. Maybe over here we've got a hamburger menu. And then this, we have tons of room to kind of fill out the rest of the space. So I think this could be potentially really appealing to somebody who is more used to working with code and working with the media queries, and also it's got these UI pieces. But also a lot of the same stuff. We've got the fill, shadows, borders. We can look at the XY position, the width and height of things, the rotation. We can change the zoom. We can start building in interactions. So for example, I could have this where if I click on this box, I click on interaction, I could say new interaction, click or tap, and there's a lot more options in here. I can say open link, and then I could say, okay, well, this will take me to the contact. And then maybe if I click on this, new interaction, click, open, and this will take me to the about. And here we can actually see what's going to be interactive or not on these. Let me change this. Contact, about. Here we have the option of previewing it. So I can click on this. It looks the same because I copied them, but we can tell which pages over here if we need to. Here I didn't change the heading, so that's part of how we can know. Let me go back, click on the about box, and it switched us over. So there's a nice way that we can kind of preview everything. I forgot, this opens in the browser, so you have to go back to the app and close it. And then you can also add in notes, so you can add in little notations. I can share this, so I can create a name, demo, I can get a shareable link, publish it, and then you can share this link and then add that to Canvas to submit it, essentially. So this should cover everything that you really need to know in order to be able to work on the work this week and the assignment and everything. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me this week and then also next week. I'm going to be giving you plenty of time where you can work on things when we do get back if you do have any follow-up questions. So just let me know if there's anything else that you'd like to see. And I know I didn't go over like quite as much in Axure, but a lot of it really is the same. It's just kind of getting used to this space. And then next time we'll go over more of working with styles and images and that sort of thing. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end this. This is getting very long, and I need to make sure that I try to edit it just a little bit.